Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening. And we are now into the aftermath of the UK election, and so a little bit of analysis. And the Labour Party just didn't get defeated. They got absolutely thrashed. And when you look at the map of where they got thrashed, is in their traditional strongholds in the north and the northwest, or where all the mill towns are, the steel towns, the factories and this kind of stuff, the fisheries. Because, well, you know, when I was a young lad, the Labour Party was truly the working man's party. They represented all Labour, they were very pro-union, and that's how they established this stronghold. And now they have gone so far left that they are unrecognisable. And it is again interesting if you look at this map, which I'm just going to put up here so you can see as we talk, how much of the country went blue. But the stronghold is actually in London, which is of course your banking and the elitist group live in London really. So it just shows you how much the Labour support has changed over the years. But Labour really has become invaded by radical leftists, and they just completely overtook the whole agenda. Listening to some of the interviews with the Labour MPs, definitely the top two issues. Number one was Jeremy Corbyn himself as a personality. He was just absolutely disliked by old and young, male and female alike. And the second, of course, was Brexit. That was a huge, huge issue. But as I said, I think, you know, what has happened over the last 3 years is that people have really been allowed to see what this brand of Marxism looks like. And that is, there is no deal. There is no fair way. When they lose, they just keep whining and complaining and crying, just as they are now. They're rioting. Boris Johnson is not my Prime Minister, etc., etc., etc. You know, they're calling him undemocratic, an Islamophobe, a homophobe, everything that you can think of. And yet it's funny that it is actually the Conservatives who are talking about referendums, more public representation, democracy. This was a democratically held election. Everyone agreed beforehand what the rules were, how we're going to vote. We've held these elections many, many times before. It's not a new issue. And now all of a sudden, oh no, winning by ballot is no longer fair when you lose. And of course we all know that had Labour government won, had Jeremy Corbyn now been Prime Minister, there would be no complaining. It would be, well, we won fair and square, this was a democratic vote, blah-de-blah-de-blah. I mean, this is what people are sick and tired of, is that this is where it's going to go. This is the kind of leadership that we were going to see if Jeremy Corbyn got into the Prime Minister's office. And of course this is a forewarning of what could happen and will probably happen in the United States next year in the 2020 elections, because the Democratic Party has gone in exactly the same direction. They've gone to this far left radical notion of doing business. And you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So what I think I am seeing here, finally, I hoped I would see this in my lifetime, because the silent majority has done exactly that, remained silent. Now, I personally think that these radical groups, the left and the right, basically occupy about 10% either end of the spectrum. And the rest of us, the other 80%, basically want to see common sense. We're not frightened of change, we're not backward thinkers, but we need to see some common sense change. And we need to be able to start doing things that are doable instead of lofty ideals which are probably going to be impossible to achieve. And I think that the 80% has finally gotten sick and tired of being offered the choice between basically Stalin on the left, Marxism, or Hitler and fascism on the right. And neither of those choices are good choices for us. We need to be in that mushy middle ground. I mean, I know it sounds kind of dull, but that is where our interests are best served. For the 80%, the majority of us are served in living in a cooperative society where we can all get along and not slinging milkshakes at each other. Anyway, let's go to this Zero Hedge article. I think it's very interesting, and then we'll come back and I'll do a very quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. From Zero Hedge, Corbyn's massive defeat is the big wake-up call for Democrats. authored by Mike Shedlock via Mishtalk. It's time for US Democrats to reflect on the message UK voters gave Labour this week. Labour manifesto, stuff of third world dictatorships. Newsflash, Elizabeth Warren's manifesto, nearly the same. Hello Elizabeth, this is Jeremy Corbyn. About your radical plan to save America. I've been doing some reflecting. Guess what? Jeremy Corbyn went down in flames. Jeremy Corbyn went down in flames this week in the biggest Labour defeat in 35 years. The above proposed phone call will never happen because Corbyn refuses to admit he's the reason for Labour's massive defeat. Corbyn will stand down as party leader in January, but he wants time to reflect on what happened. Corbyn already sounds like Hillary. Corbyn blamed Brexit, he blamed the media, he blamed disgusting politicians. On the latter he is of course correct, he just forgot to look in the mirror whilst making that statement. He just forgot one thing, he forgot to blame Russia. He will have plenty of time to reflect on things, then blame Russia. Media versus the polls. The polls mostly got this correct. The media kept saying too close to call. Flashback November 18th, fear of Corbyn outweighs fear of Brexit. My comment? This election is no longer primarily about Brexit, it's primarily about Corbyn. Perhaps this is easier to see from afar. Perhaps it is simple willingness to dive into the polls. Either way, Corbyn's unpopularity was of epic proportion, poll after poll after poll. Why is it shocking news that people, when they finally got into the voting booth, voted against someone they could not stand? Time for reflection. Corbyn says it's time to reflect. Please, let's do. Since it's time to reflect, please reflect on the above question in reference to Hillary and why she lost. Let's also reflect on Corbyn's radical manifesto. Labour's radical plan highlights: 1. Increase government spending by a massive £82 billion a year, about 4% of GDP, all paid for by rising taxes. 2. A £400 billion National Transformation Fund, which would add to the government's debt, but isn't in the headline figures. 3. Nationalisation of rail, water, energy, bus, mail and broadband companies. 4. Seizure of 10% of the shares in every big UK company and handing the shares to workers. 5. Raise the corporate tax rate to 26% from 19%. 6. An £11 billion windfall tax on the oil and gas sector. 7. Free broadband internet for everyone. 8. Free shelter for the homeless. 9. Super rich tax rate. 10. Tax on second homes. 11. Raise £8 billion via financial transactions tax. 12. Higher inheritance tax. 13. Force landlords to sell homes to tenants at a fair price as determined by Labour. And I will leave the full platform linked in the description box below. Democrats take note. I wrote about Corbyn's radical manifesto on November 23rd with this message: Jeremy Corbyn goes broke with last desperate act. US Democrats take note. My lead-in comment, Labour's manifesto is a final act of desperation. US Democrats, especially Elizabeth Warren, should take note. Free everything. In the US Democratic debates, the candidates are still trying to outdo each other with free this and free that. Warren is at the top of the list. Like Corbyn, she wants to nationalise everything possible and break up the rest. She wants free healthcare, free education, free shelter. She also wants a wealth tax. In the UK, voters did not believe Corbyn's plan was remotely possible. Ironically, Corbyn decided his 2017 plan was not radical enough, so he made it even more radical. Labour hijacked. The Washington Examiner explains how Jeremy Corbyn hijacked the Labour Party. Corbyn was the underdog in the Labour Party's 2015 leadership race. He was a long-serving radical backbench MP known for his anti-Western foreign policy stances, competing against multiple well-qualified moderate Labour candidates. He maximised the change to voting rules and signed up thousands of far-left grassroots activists who would turn the formerly centrist Labour Party of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown into an effective vehicle for his socialist ideals. He received a landslide of 59.5% of first preference votes. Building on his success, he created a far-left political movement called Momentum, which has been described as the party within the party. News for you. Corbyn and Warren are two peas in the same radical left plan. Warren, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders and AOC now attempt the same thing in the US. If they succeed, they may well deliver the same result. I wrote about this on December the 5th. How to re-elect Trump in one easy lesson. Please consider how to re-elect Trump in one easy lesson. Radical progressives are up in arms. Ironically, if Trump wins again, they will be the reason. Forget the base. Why appeal to the radicals? Where are they going? I ask the same questions of the Republicans and Democrats alike. If given a choice between Biden or Bloomberg versus Trump, progressives will vote for Biden or Bloomberg. Question: why? Answer: under no circumstances will they vote for Trump. So how is Bloomberg a liability? What about independents? Independents might easily vote for Biden or Bloomberg. In contrast, they might not easily vote for Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. In fact, Harris and Warren, darlings of the progressives, might be the only people that Trump could beat. These kinds of honest assessments got me in hot water. Unqualified. Such analysis led me to labeling Kamala Harris as unqualified. My reason, which I explained, was that I did not believe she could win the election. I immediately came under attack by the radical progressives on Twitter for days after I posted such a tweet. I am in another tweet storm right now over why Corbyn lost. Hint: don't try to speak rationally to the radical leftists. They are hopelessly delusional. Divided political parties. In the UK, the left splintered over Brexit. On top of it, Labour advanced a Marxist left-wing programme of free stuff, just as Sanders and Warren do here. Labour's plan was so radical that not even its base believed the manifesto was possible. In both the US and the UK voting systems, it is suicidal not to unite. Yet it is damn hard to unite around radical views or behind radical persons. As much as voters disliked Trump, they disliked Hillary more. Warren is probably not as disliked personally as Hillary, but her plan is as radical Marxist as Corbyn's. Warren may be the only candidate that Trump can beat, just as Hillary was the only person Trump could beat 4 years ago. Yet Warren is the darling of all the progressives, hell-bent on hijacking the party platform to the most radical agenda possible. The winning path is to pick a candidate the moderates and independents will back. The core and the radicals are going nowhere. And remember that phone call, that won't happen. Hello Elizabeth, this is Jeremy Corbyn. About your radical plan to save America. I've been doing some reflecting. Guess what? That phone call will never happen, nor will Hillary nor Corbyn ever look in the mirror and blame themselves. So I think Mish does a pretty good job there of summing up the issues around this election and the warnings, the very real warnings for the Democrats. But I also think that, we all realise, certainly for myself and quite a few other people still alive today, we have seen the end of communism. We watched Russia collapse under the weight of communism. And yes, there may be other influences in other communistic countries, but even China, even though it has remained completely repressive with its own people, it had to change its attitude, open its doors to some capitalism, and change its whole way of doing business. Okay, I think they realized that if you don't have some incentives built into the system, people become unimaginative, dull, and of course this was one of the huge issues with Russia when the communism fell, was that people didn't know what to do without state support. So having your own business, being entrepreneurial, was an absolute mystery, and it's taken them 10 or 15 years to actually get back on their feet. And now, of course, Russia has its own internal issues. There's absolutely no doubt about that. However, we all can see that absolute outright communism does not work because it suppresses free speech, imagination, and ingenuity. And capitalism, for all its faults, capitalism and democracy for all its faults, and I will be the first to admit, there are many things that we can change. But under this system, we have prospered, we have grown, we have invented and reinvented so many things to the betterment of our lives, and this is all through freedom of thought and freedom of speech. When you suppress those things, all of a sudden, and we can see that the beginnings of that right now with all of the censorship that's going on, is that people are afraid to speak plainly. Okay, and if we can't speak plainly, if we can't use real words, and if we're not allowed to make mistakes, we cannot negotiate our way forward. And that is imperative. That's the only way we can move forward, is by negotiating with each other and negotiating with all of the obstacles that are placed in our way. So shutting down freedom of speech, whatever the risks are, whatever the negatives are, and so those 10%, those two extremes on either side have been amplified, and we are being frightened and intimidated to the point that if we do not choose, for example, the far left, then we will be overwhelmed by the far right, and of course vice versa. The far right is trying to make you think that if we don't accept that, we will be overwhelmed by the far left. And in the meantime, we seem to be overwhelmed by both sides. Anyway, I am hopeful that finally the silent majority, the 80% in the middle, are now speaking up like I am and appealing for common sense. And, this is not, like I say, we are not backward thinkers. I don't carry any real prejudices against anybody. Whatever you do with your life, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, is pretty much up to you. I have no biases in either direction. Whatever that is, let's just stick with reality. Let's keep things real. Let's deal with reality. Let's deal with the real world, not some imaginary world. And I think with a little bit of common sense acceptance, we're all different. Let's just accept people for what they are and who they are, as long as we can do it without violence. And that's the direction we need to be moving in. We need to move towards negotiated settlements, not violently resolved settlements. And this needs to be a worldwide goal. And no cheating. I know that seems kind of childish to say, but that we all accept that we're not going to deal with each other in a violent fashion, and we're going to negotiate our way out of all of the obstacles in which we find ourselves. But I really do think that this is the end of the left, certainly the far left, and I think with it will die the far right, because they're both expressing themselves in very, very poor regards. But do not be surprised if you see President Trump re-elected for a second term in 2020. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. You take care. See ya. Bye.